Welcome to the High Road to Leadership, a journey to the heart of success and significance. I'm your host, Beverly Lewis, and today I've got an amazing guest for this episode. I want you to meet Kathleen Koch. Kathleen is an international speaker on disaster and resilience and a founder of LeadersLink, the first nonprofit to harness and share elected officials' disaster lessons learned to help other communities better prevent, prepare for, and recover from similar crises. Koch is also an award-winning former journalist and author who for 18 years was a CNN Washington correspondent covering the White House, Pentagon and Capitol Hill, as well as numerous disasters, including 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. She currently writes op-eds for CNN.com, USA Today, U.S. News, and World Report, and other publications. I could go on and on because Kathleen's accomplishments are significant, but I have to make a personal introduction. I met Kathleen just following Hurricane Michael in Panama City in fall of 2018. Category 5 hurricane had smacked us hard. Kathleen, I have to welcome you first as I tell this story. I thank you for coming then, and I thank you for coming now.
You're so welcome, Beverly. When you experience disaster yourself, I grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, starting in middle school. And after Hurricane Katrina, the devastation that my community experienced and that I covered as a reporter for CNN, and then wrote a book about and did documentaries on, it just makes you it connects you with people who've experienced other disasters, and you really want to share what you've learned. And so I just had to get down to Panama City to talk to people like you, to let you know what was coming. Obviously, I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but that you get through it.
Well, I tell you, I remember that day very clearly because we had to drive through a wrecked part of town. Of course, what part of town wasn't wrecked? And, the trees were just hanging and broken, and the building was broken. We met in a community center that didn't have heat, and it was December, and it was cold, and everybody had on their jackets, and the lights.
But it had electricity, right? And it had a roof, right? Which was kind of rare. And so
I know.
It worked.
And I can remember thinking, you came here into this mess to give us a message of hope. And one of my favorite quotes about leadership has always been, leaders are dealers in hope. So forevermore, that's who Kathleen Koch will be to me, she is my personal dealer in hope, because you came that day and conveyed that we would get through it. And I remember I had trouble believing it until you even had managed to bring a projector and show us pictures of your hometown right after Hurricane Katrina, and then as an award-winning destination. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have hope. And I also never forget that you said it's going to probably take about 4 years until things begin to look normal. And now, 2.5 years into this, I can see, you were right. You were right. But that's such a special, you're right. The bond that, and the respect that I had for you that day. And then the fact that through our aftermath, we continued to stay in touch and you put me in touch with environmental ecologists and people that helped me understand what was going on. So this has led you to start the nonprofit that you work with now, LeadersLink.
LeadersLink. Well, it actually started a few years back before that because, I just saw during Hurricane Katrina how communities with wise, optimistic leadership thrived while those without it faltered. And it was actually around the time of Superstorm Sandy, when that hit the Jersey Shore and New York and parts of Connecticut, I saw little communities on the Jersey Shore that were very similar in size and also in in some of them, to the devastation that some of our communities experienced from Katrina on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. But the one difference was their leaders were novices when it came to disaster recovery, and ours were experts. So I started partnering them up, offering basically disaster mentor to any of the elected officials on the Jersey Shore, at the county or the city level who wanted one. And, some of those partnerships just took off. And I went, hey, maybe I'm onto something here. Because I really think, just as I wanted to share what I learned with the people in your community, these elected officials who went through Katrina wanted to share what they learned with others. And it was a healing experience for them, too. So everyone gets something out of it. And so that's how LeadersLink was born, because we were just really focused on harnessing, again, and sharing those, that institutional knowledge that you can only acquire when you've gone through a disaster yourself. You can participate in drills, and I think that's very important. You can do tabletops, and you can take classes, and you can read books, but there's nothing like experience to really bring home to you what you're going to need as a leader to lead your community through something. And so, that's what LeadersLink is all about. And it's, we're still growing, but every time we help one city, one mayor, that's an entire city or an entire county we helped. So I tell other people in the nonprofit world, don't sweat if you're not helping every state in the country or as many people as you think. The world may see you as one person, but to one person or one community, you may be the world. So keep pushing.
That is a profound statement. And you used the words wise, optimistic leadership. And that really rang my bell. So that kind of leads me to the question of, I'd like to hear your insight into what are some of the key qualities and attributes that you've observed are, who hasn't been through a disaster now that we've had the pandemic? All of us have had to be aware of coping with the unexpected and undesirable. So talk to me about what you've learned from watching leaders in action and what works and what doesn't.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Beverly, with we've all been through what is essentially a long, slow-moving disaster, the pandemic. And one of the first things I think we've all learned, remember a little over a year ago, the rush on the grocery stores, how the shelves were empty, the panic. Crises reveal people's true natures, for better or for worse. And so we saw that as individuals. Again, we saw people who went and bought up every speck of toilet paper that they could get that was on the shelves, way more than they would ever need. And then there were others who went and bought just what they needed. And so we learned, again, you see the good, the bad, and the ugly during a crisis or a disaster. And it's the same thing if you're a leader you have a business. I'm sure you saw a lot. You learned a lot about the people who work for you, about the people who partner with you, a lot about yourself. And this was also a time, I think, when we realized it was so important to have supportive partnerships in advance that you could really rely on, because you weren't going to get through this. And we're still in it. I'm not saying it's over by any stretch of the imagination, but you weren't going to get through this without someone who had your back. And that's one of the lessons that we teach elected officials about disasters and crises. You don't want to be exchanging business cards in the middle of a debris field. You need to have those pre-existing relationships with people who you can count on, and multiple people, because in this case, so many different suppliers of businesses, they ran out of product themselves. So you needed to have not just supplier A, but you needed to have supplier B and C waiting in the wings. So that was one of the first things that I really noticed.
Okay, so on an individual basis, as far as leadership qualities now, what would you advise a leader of a city or an organization? I know you're working with communities and cities, but of course, the individual people that lead those places. What would you say is one of the most highly valued besides networking and relationships? I keep hearing that from you, and that resonates with me because I'm all about heart-based leadership, which is extremely relational. I always say that the quality of your life is based on the quality of your relationships, and the quality of your relationships are based on the quality of your communication. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's just say a budding leader, somebody that's just out of college and moving into leadership and wanting to be the best they can be for the unexpected ahead. What would you tell them to work on?
I think you made a really important point there with communication. And communication, there are two parts of it, right? There's the delivering of information and there's the receiving of information. And I think sometimes leaders spend a bit too much time on the delivering of information because they're the boss, they're the leader. And I hope everyone doesn't think this, but a lot of them think they know it all, right? So I think there is a bit of a deficit when it comes to listening. And I think that's so important right now. As we are figuring our way out of this pandemic, but this applies during any crisis, it is so important to listen. Okay, if you, again, are a head of a business, a company, right now you are trying to figure out how you move forward, and you are having to be concerned about things you weren't concerned about in the past. The health and welfare of your. I wouldn't say you weren't concerned about, but you are more in the weeds about the health of your employees than ever before. So I'm kind of diverging a little bit away from your advice for newbies, but I'll get to some there. But I think right now leaders need to be listening to their workers, listening to what people think about the way forward. During disasters and crises, we tell our leaders it's very easy as you proceed, you want to do things to and for people. You want to help them. You want to take care of them. But what you're trying to do will be much better received if you bring them into it, if you do things with people. People tend to support what they help create. So there's some advice for a newbie leader as you're proceeding forward. Seek always to listen and do things with. You may have great ideas, but you don't learn if you're always talking. When do you learn? You learn when you stop talking and you listen. So keep that in mind, and that will stand you in good stead, because you might be surprised about the ideas of people around you that could improve the great idea, the great plans you have for your future enterprise, your future invention. But if you don't ask and you don't stop talking and start listening, you'll never know.
That's so key. So key. I'm taking notes and I'm listening. And that is another reason I have to thank you. One of my motivations, I have to admit, is in doing this podcast is a little selfish, because I thought the way I can become a better person is by being around great people and like you, and listening and learning and paying attention. So that brings me to another question, that the people that we learn from, you've, as a journalist, interviewed a lot of very well-known people. You've met the movers and the shakers and, moved in the circles in Washington, D.C. But I have to ask, it doesn't have to be one, but tell me about some of the people who have impressed you the most and left an impression on you from a leadership standpoint with their integrity and leadership ability.
That's hard, because there are so many. I have to. Actually, I'm going to talk about one, I will tell you, because he passed away a few years ago. But this was someone who I met as a young correspondent when I first arrived in Washington in 1984. And that was then Congressman John McCain. And I was quite impressed with his accomplishments up until that point. I mean, obviously, he was a war hero. his history as a fighter pilot, having been shot down in 1967 over Vietnam, taken prisoner by the North Vietnamese. When he ejected, he broke both arms and one leg. When he was dragged out of the river, I think it was a lake that he landed in, the Vietnamese, they bayoneted him and broke his shoulder. And then he was held for 5.5 years. He was brutally tortured. And when he was offered the chance to be released early, when the Vietnamese realized it was his father who had been named commander of all U.S. forces in Vietnam, John McCain said no. Said, no, that's not the way things work here. We have a rule as far as POWs, first in, first out. And that was the credo they followed. So the officers who were released in the order in which they'd been captured. And he said, no, I'm not taking any special treatment, any special favors. So I guess I was impressed with that from the start. Someone who had served volunteered to serve in the military. His grandfather had been in the military, so it was part of his family history. But then to put others before himself and to undergo, what he did for 5.5 years was just remarkable. So I was a little bit intimidated by him because I knew he didn't suffer fools lightly. And then in the years to come, as he was elected senator and then went on to, lead so many, to take the lead in so many important measures in Congress. Campaign finance reform was one that was successful. Immigration reform was one that was not successful. But I appreciated the maverick in him. I appreciated the way he did what he believed was right. He put the country before party. And I think that is very rare. It's difficult anytime. I think it's incredibly difficult right now. And I appreciated and respected that in him. But then Beverly, I also saw other interesting things, when he ran for president and when he lost. I think you really see what someone is made of when they are brought to their lowest point. And then and many people may not remember it. It was a long time ago to 2008, but when the concession speech that he made when he lost was so humble, so eloquent, and so unifying. At a time when he could have blasted Barack Obama, been angry and bitter, he wasn't. And he showed such a leadership. And he also had a great sense of humor. I participated in many events that he did in the years after I left CNN, left CNN in 2009, and he would often be on my panels, and I would always introduce him and mention the fact that he had been a candidate for president. And he had, again, terrific sense of humor. He would laugh and he'd say, well, Kathleen, thank you for mentioning that. Yes, ever since I lost, I've slept like a baby. Sleep for 3 hours, wake up and cry. Sleep for 3 hours, wake up and cry. So he had this self-deprecating sense of humor. And then at the end, when he was diagnosed with brain cancer, the glioblastoma that he had, he kept working, he kept pushing forward. He was no fan of the Affordable Care Act. But then in 2017, as he was getting his treatment for brain cancer, and he was asked to come on the floor of the U.S. Senate and pass the defining vote that would have killed that measure, he said no. He couldn't bring himself to, while he was getting the best health care available in the country, to take that very access to health care away from millions of Americans. And it was a tough decision because he thought the Affordable Care Act could be made better. So it was just, he was someone who I thought, in so many ways. I didn't agree with everything he did or said. I don't think there's anyone who I agree with 100% on the face of the earth. But he showed such courage. He always, I believe, put our country before himself, no matter what. And again, just someone I admire immensely. And I'm sorry for going on so long.
I tell you what, it honestly gave me goosebumps as far as when you have the ability to learn from a leader like that. So many people, their leaders of influence are historical figures, because it's hard to find people in the flesh like that don't disappoint you and don't, because we're all human. We can all fail, we can all fall, we can all make bad decisions. But because you talked about him, and I think of him as a patriot, that he was a true patriot. Because of that, it actually leads me to a question I wasn't sure I was going to bring up, because you are in a unique position. You were working with leaders. You're still very much an influencer, and you've learned from so many influencers. And today, we see such a disparity in America, and people don't trust anything they hear. They don't know who to trust. They used to trust the news and the media, and I'm not going to throw any rocks there, because I feel like the social media, last 20 years, where we all now have a public voice, we have greatly influenced the way people perceive the news. So my question is, what can we do as leaders to help shift it back to a place of integrity and trust? I believe there's something that we can do, but I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, speak the truth. Let's start there. Let's speak the truth. And that's not always easy to do, especially during a crisis. You might be afraid of panicking people, right? But I think as a leader, if that's perhaps your highest responsibility, is to speak the truth to your constituents, to your employees, to your staff. Because if you don't, then how are they going to be able to make good decisions? It's sort of like if you're programming a computer. If you put bad data in, you're going to get bad data out, bad outcomes, right? So we have to start with the truth. But you can also, even if it's difficult truth that you're sharing with people, you can balance it with optimism. And that's what we tell leaders, and that's what I've seen successful leaders do during disasters and crises. I saw that happen in my community of Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, after Hurricane Katrina. I mean, that town was virtually wiped off the map. 95% of it was underwater. 75% of the homes and businesses were heavily damaged or destroyed. And there are many people who, would have said, forget about it. This place is done. And a lot of people left. But the mayor of our town, Eddie Favre, he had grown up in Bay St. Louis, knew and loved the place. And he had just this wonderful way of balancing the truth, sharing the facts, but with optimism. I'll share a couple of quick stories. About a month or so after Katrina hit, I was walking with him through the debris of downtown, and he came across a woman who, she was in her 70s, and she ran up and embraced him, and she told him that she and her husband were back for a visit. She said, "Oh, Eddie, we're back for a visit, and I got to tell you, we're now residents of Charleston, South Carolina." And Eddie stopped her, wagging his finger, and went, No, you are visitors to Charleston, okay? Visitors. He was always making it clear that Bay St. Louis would not die. As bad as things looked, that we were going to get through it. And I love what he used to tell everyone. He'd say, we may not have houses, but everyone here has a home. And we may have lost everything, but we still have each other. And every day, as long as it's a little bit better today than it was yesterday, we're on the right track. That used to bring tears to my eyes, but it kept people going. It was just that perfect mix of, okay, things are bad. They are really bad, but we're here, we're together, we're supporting one another, and we are going to get through it. And Beverly, I just think it's having that kind of courage. That's part of what you signed on to display as a leader. If you took a leadership role, you didn't sign up to lead from the rear. You signed up to, do the hard work. And so being honest and being courageous, being optimistic it's not easy. But, what you can do, too, what's so important is when you're in these difficult times, as we are, as Bay St. Louis was after Katrina, then as Eddie said, every day it's a little bit better than it was yesterday, and we're on the right track. So you would celebrate the little victories. And that's what we have to keep doing right now, and what leaders need to as we move through this. Every little improvement, hey, send out an email, have a party, praise the person who made that great decision that got you to where you are. Maybe you're only 20 feet ahead of where you were yesterday, but you're moving in the right direction. And that helps engender hope. And so if you have honesty, then you have trust. And people don't want to hear BS, and they know it. I think especially today, I think people can tell when someone is painting an overly rosy picture for them. They're big kids, they can handle it. So trust your voters, your constituents, your staff, your workers, and they're going to be more likely to trust you and to work hard for you.
Wow. That is a lot of nuggets in that. And I know that, gosh, it's so easy to talk to you. We could talk for hours, but what I want to do as we head for a wrap is just hear from you. I love your stories, and I'd like to hear from you a couple lessons that you carry with you from watching superb leadership under pressure.
Couple of things. The ability to adapt. Okay, that has been crucial during the pandemic. It's crucial during every disaster. But that ability to pivot, and we've all done that throughout the pandemic, right? From life as it was, work as it was, to what it is now. So that's a huge key to being a successful leader, running a successful business, a successful enterprise. And as we look to the future and getting through this crisis, and other crises, I think it's important to see them as something that you learn from. They change you. So see that as an opportunity. As difficult as it was, we have learned new ways of working, of living. We've learned that just because something has never been done doesn't mean it can't be done. All right, so that was a really valuable lesson. And then perhaps something to close on is that, at the beginning I said that disasters reveal people's true natures, for better or for worse. So how you perform in a crisis or a disaster, that's going to be your legacy. That will be your lasting legacy. It will be what people remember about you. So if you showed up during the pandemic, if you did the right thing, if you spoke the truth, if you led from the front, if you were courageous, people will remember that. And I just think a great example of that, again, going back to my Katrina stories, but there was a bank on the Mississippi Gulf Coast that, like virtually everything else, was destroyed in the hurricane, and that was Hancock Bank. And 90% of its branches severely damaged or destroyed. There was no power. The bank had no way of knowing who its customers were, how much they had in their accounts. There was no power, so this was an all-cash economy, right, down there in the debris field. So people needed cash more than anything else. So what did the bank do? They're like, how are we going to move forward, right? They went to the bank's charter, and they read it, and they found that it focused entirely on serving people, taking care of communities, and the word profit never appeared. So they did something that a lot of people might say was crazy. They set up card tables underneath tarps outside of what was left of their branches up and down the Gulf Coast, and they started giving away money, just giving it away, $200 to anyone who would sign a slip of paper, giving their name, their address, and a contact number. So no, you didn't have to show an ID. So no ID, no problem. Not a Hancock Bank customer, not a problem. So by the time they finished, Beverly, and they were just, again, handing out $200 here, $200 there. Sure, here, just fill out this information on a sticky tab and get it back to us. Just pay us back when you can. They gave out $42 million.
Wow.
And this sustained the people of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, kept the economy afloat. Now, again, you would say that was certifiable. What a stupid thing to do. That money is gone. $42 million flushed down the drain, right? Well, within 3 years, all but $200,000 of those loans, and that's 99.5%, had been paid back. A funny thing happened. Within months of the hurricane, 13,000 new accounts were opened at Hancock Bank, and deposits had risen by $1.5 billion. Billion with a B. Remarkable, right?
Yes.
Because
remarkable.
They didn't do what most people would say was the smart thing for the bottom line. What actuaries would say, oh, yes, this will make us a profit. They did the crazy thing. They thought outside the box. They put people first. Community first, the good of the Gulf Coast first. And it paid off. So I think in times of crisis, do the right thing. Put people first. Be courageous. Speak the truth. That's what leaders do.
You said it all. And I know that our listeners want to hear more and know how they can reach you. You are a speaker globally and certainly nationally as well. And Kathleen Koch.
KathleenKoch.com. So KathleenKoch.com. KathleenKoch.com. Yes. I do public speaking all around the country and the world, and I will do it virtually for those who still feel that's important, and in many places it still is. I am fully vaccinated, so I am ready to start doing events in person when people believe that's safe. I also, I'm still running LeadersLink, a terrific nonprofit. We didn't fundraise this year, Beverly. We felt the economy was struggling so greatly that we set that aside. But, you can go to LeadersLink.org and make a donation. We would be happy to have it to use to continue to help communities after disasters. And we help them by helping their leaders be better leaders, by giving them someone they can turn to who's been through it and who can share, hey, this is what worked for me. This is what didn't. Don't make the same mistakes we did. And we're here to support you. We got your back.
What a phenomenal episode this has been. And I want to thank you so much for being part of the High Road to Leadership today. All these links that you mentioned will be in the show notes for our listeners. And I want to thank you so much. Thank you for being a dealer in hope and always giving us the message that the best is yet to come.
Thank you, Beverly.